I'd like to welcome everyone to the CO podcast series, Stroke Matters. A special thank you to Advocate Aurora Health for sponsoring this podcast. My name is Christine Winicky, CO Director, and your host for today. The topic for today's call is prescription versus over-the-counter medicines. Introduce our presenter. Amina George is a clinical pharmacy specialist in the Neuro ICU at Advocate Lutheran General Hospital. She's been a pharmacist at Lutheran General for almost 12 years, working both in emergency and critical care settings. Welcome, Amina.
Thank you, Christine. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for doing this call. We've done something similar to this about 10 years ago, and it was a teleconference series where we actually talked about this topic, and it was more of an open discussion, question and answer time. And this topic was one of the most popular ones that we've done in the 10 years that we've done different topics on stroke or things that are related to stroke. There was a lot of questions and just a lot of emails afterwards. So we just thought, it'd be nice to kind of revisit it and just ask you some questions, just because there's so much out there. And so we thought it would be nice just to talk a little bit more about this topic. So I wanted to ask you, what is the difference between prescription versus the over-the-counter medicines? What's the difference between the two?
Sure. So there is a significant difference. Prescription drugs are ones that are prescribed by a physician, and they are specifically for an individual person to be used only by that person and to treat a very specific medical diagnosis. These medications, they can only be purchased at a pharmacy and only with a prescription from a licensed prescriber. Prescription drugs are regulated by the FDA, and the FDA specifically is the Food and Drug Administration through a process called the New Drug Application. Essentially, this is just a formal step that drug manufacturers or sponsors take that basically asks the FDA to consider approval of a new drug for marketing in the United States. And Europe also has a similar kind of process with a governing body that's similar to the FDA. That specifically is the European Medicines Association. So with that being said, the application includes all human and animal studies that have been performed by the manufacturer, as well as information regarding how the drug behaves in the body and how it's manufactured. Now, on the flip side, OTC drugs are drugs that don't require a doctor's prescription. And by some definitions, you can even include nutritional supplements and natural homeopathic remedies in this category. These can be bought off the shelf in stores, and these are indicated for self-treatment of certain very limited conditions. OTC medications as well are regulated by the FDA through something called an OTC drug monograph. And this is kind of a recipe book that covers acceptable ingredients, doses, formulations, and labeling of those products. And those monographs are updated kind of on a regular basis whenever something changes, whenever the manufacturers change something.
Okay. I guess I didn't realize that there was somebody oversaw the OTC medicines, but that's good to know from a consumer standpoint. That's good to know. So what are generic drugs?
The FDA's definition of a generic drug, and I quote this from the FDA website, is a medication created to be the same as an already manufactured or marketed brand name drug in dosage form, safety, strength, route of administration, the quality of the product, as well as its performance characteristics and its intended use.
Okay. Typically aren't generic drugs less expensive too? So that's why people choose that versus the name brand. Is that kind of how it works?
Absolutely. There's a lot of things that go into branded drugs in terms of research. And it's a very costly process. And once that patent is lifted, essentially, many manufacturers are allowed to create these generic drugs, which again are intended to be the same in terms of effectiveness, safety, quality, but they don't have to do that costly research, so they can offer that price advantage.
And I think you kind of answered this question. So they're pretty much Because I guess I've heard too, sometimes I hear this on the news or whatever, they are as effective as the brand name, correct? I mean, they have the same, like you said, ingredients and the same process is being done so that they are just as effective?
Yeah, so based on FDA standards, generic medications are really designed to be the same as brand names, again, in terms of efficacy, quality, safety. You know, we talked about kind of the drug approval process for brand name drugs. Generic drug manufacturers, they also have to go through a similar process. They apply through what we call an ANDA, which is an abbreviated new drug application. They need to demonstrate that their generic version of the medicine contains the same active ingredient, the same at the same dose, show bioequivalence, meaning that it does the exact same thing that the branded name drug does in the body. The formulation of the drug, as well as how it's taken, or what we call in pharmacy terms, the route of administration, has to be the same. So, for instance, if a brand name drug comes in a tablet and is taken by mouth, the generic version has to be kind of the same, a tablet that's taken by mouth. One thing is, due to patent laws, generic versions of drugs, they can't actually look the same as a branded drug. So, you know, consumers should be aware that the pill or whatever the formulation is, it's going to look different. It may not have the same shape, flavor, or color. And then another difference is that generics and brands differ in the inactive ingredients that are contained in each of those. And really, those should not have any effect on how the medication works. And again, like you said, from a cost perspective, generics tend to be much less costly because they're not spending those large amount, those millions and trillions of dollars on lengthy preclinical and clinical trials.
Right. And I know that just personally for myself, when I've gotten my medications and they're the generic, the pharmacist always tells me that they will look different, or the bottle might be different, but that it's the same medication. So, you know, I guess that, you know, they always do tell you that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Because a lot of people do question that and are confused by it.
Right, right. Um, what should you look for when you're selecting? Well, I guess you sort of answered this too when you're selecting an over-the-counter medicine. I guess you sort of did that there are different regulations and oversight on that. Is there anything specific you should be looking for when you're looking at over-the-counter medications? Because there's so much out there, and people are looking at generic and brand name for this, that. There's just, it's overwhelming, really.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, when we think about it, OTC meds are really highly utilized across the United States, even across the world, and it's literally a billion-dollar industry. OTCs, they allow the customer the opportunity and kind of the freedom to self-treat a number of things: pain, allergies, cough and cold, heartburn, many other things, and they're highly accessible and they don't cost a lot. But the thing about OTC meds is they aren't always benign or as harmless as we think. And kind of the most straightforward example that I can think of is just buying over-the-counter acetaminophen, or what a lot of people refer to as Tylenol. I mean, if you take it too often, or even for short periods of time in larger amounts, Tylenol or acetaminophen can lead to liver failure. And in addition to this, over-the-counter meds can often interact with other over-the-counter drugs as well as prescription medicines in ways that can make them either ineffective or cause unwanted side effects that can lead to patient harm. Some examples of patient harm can be falls, overdoses from taking several over-the-counter medicines with duplicate ingredients. You can have elevations in heart rate or blood pressure, and a multitude of other effects. And really what all of this just means is that patients need to be aware of the harms as well as the benefits of over-the-counter meds, and make sure that they're paying close attention to exactly what they're taking. I think in general, it's always a good idea to check with your doctor before you start an over-the-counter med, especially if you're an individual that has underlying health conditions, or if you're taking a lot of other medicines, if you're elderly, or if you plan on treating a child with over-the-counters. You know, your physician can advise you on which over-the-counter would be best for you or a family member based on your history. And also, the pharmacist is a great resource. If for whatever reason you can't call your doctor or talk to physician, talk to the pharmacist specifically at the pharmacy that you pick up your medicine from. They're able to access all of your prescription medicines, or they can talk you through, the other over-the-counters that you might be taking to kind of let you know if that's the safest choice for you and if there are any interactions that you should expect.
I would agree with that. And I've had that happen to me actually through just some issues that I had. And I talked to my doctor and I thought it was so okay to take, a natural supplement to help me sleep. And she was like, no, it's totally not good with the medication that you're taking. So I was glad that I had asked her, and you should ask your doctor, or like you said, the pharmacist, if you can't get a hold of your doctor. Super important. The other question I just wanted to quick ask you, so how would you reduce, and you kind of mentioned this too, your risk of drug to drug or even food and drug interaction, because you see a lot of, like I hadn't realized, like grapefruit is such a big deal with certain meds and, different foods and drug interactions. What do they need to look for? How do they get that information or resources to make sure that there isn't going to be maybe a food interaction or a drug interaction with the medicines they're taking?
Yeah. So again, just kind of using your physician and pharmacist to the full advantage. And they have online resources through which they can kind of plug in whatever medicines you are taking and other OTCs or herbals, as well as they have knowledge on specific food interactions. Get all of your medicine from one pharmacy if possible, because that pharmacist can monitor all the drug interactions and provide appropriate counseling. If you are going on any crash diets or changing your diet significantly, or if you lost significant amounts of weight, that's always a good idea to share with your physician or pharmacist, because again, they know specifically what types of foods or what kinds of diets affect certain medicines. They can counsel you on, it's best to take your medicine with food, without food, for maximal absorption or maximal effectiveness. So again, those are really the best. It's really about that open communication, and just making sure that if you are starting new medicines, you're letting all of your providers know. So, specifically, some people see multiple doctors for different indications, and it's just, taking the time to make sure that all of your physicians know exactly what new medicines you're starting and for what.
Okay. And I actually have one more thing, because this is, a lot of people just struggle with paying for their medications. Do you have we have some on our CO website, different resources. Are there different resources that you know of, or websites, or, like GoodRx, or different things where people can really take a look at, because medications have prescription medications have really gotten expensive, so over the counter. Is there different places they can go to or turn to maybe get help or research or resources out there?
Yeah, I think actually you mentioned GoodRx. I think that's a really valuable website, because it kind of allows you to put in your zip code, and it offers multiple pharmacies with different competitive pricing. If you're starting a branded drug that doesn't have a generic equivalent, a lot of times just going through the brand's website, they often offer coupons that you may or may not be eligible for, but at least you have a starting point. I think a lot of people just coming out of the hospital, if you've been hospitalized and you're being started on multiple medicines, many hospitals have care managers or care coordinators who can kind of plug you in with different resources, so that they can help you afford. We want to make sure that you can afford your medicine, that you're going to be compliant when you leave the hospital. So, just asking for help before discharge, and even just going to your pharmacy. If you can't afford your medicine, just asking the pharmacist who's there, hey, do you have any coupons? Do you have any resources that I would be eligible for to help me with my medicine?
Yeah, I think that's really important, because, and that goes across the board. It doesn't have to be someone that's a senior, or just everybody, particularly now with the whole pandemic and everything too. But it's just a lot of people are struggling, and so if they can find ways to cut corners or to save money, or there's different resources available, particularly when you're talking about prescription or even over-the-counter medicines, they need to take advantage of that or find those resources. Well, I think that's it for questions for right now. And I want to thank you again, Amina, for being our presenter. If you'd like to listen to today's podcast or past podcasts, you can visit the CO website at www.sseeo.org. Thank you. And thank you again, Amina.